So I'll start and with a little prayer here. In the name of the Father and Son and the Holy Spirit. O heavenly King, O comforter of the Spirit of truth, who art in all places and fillest all things, treasure of good things and giver of life, come and abide in us, cleanse from every impurity and save our souls, O gracious Lord. Amen. So the one thing I'm not going to talk about is the Middle East, because that is just a very stressful, confusing, terrible situation. So we'll leave that for another day. What I do want to talk about is tomorrow. The theme of tomorrow is the Seventh Ecumenical Council. So out of that group that's there right now, I'm wondering what percentage of you are converts? What do you think? Do you think 50%?
More than half.
More than half. Okay, yeah. That's kind of what I figured. And I don't know, each of your parishes have different ideas about iconography. I am a big believer in trying to cover every square inch of the walls in our temple with iconography. We're not there. We're about a third of the way there. We've got some more icons coming in about 3 or 4 weeks. So it's going to enhance our space. But I think there's two things going on. One is that sometimes when you've been Orthodox for a long time, or if you're a cradle Orthodox, you can come in and just take the icons for granted because they've always been there and you're not particularly moved by seeing them. But if you're a convert, like we were, icons are a really huge thing. And when we first converted to Orthodoxy, many of the people, many of the pastors in our greater area thought A, that I'd flipped, and B, that it was some sort of a cult because, and I'm not blaming them, I'm just saying because they were so ignorant, so uninformed about the history of the church and about iconography that they had no idea what an icon was. So for them, icon meant idol. For them, venerating an icon seemed like an act of worship to the image. And they just didn't have any perspective on that. Well, things have changed now, and we've been here for a long time, almost 27 years. And at this point, I'll take out my phone every single week. I'm not kidding you. Every week, I'm in some kind of coffee shop, I'm somewhere, and I'll take out my phone and I'll show them the work that's been done in our church. And they're absolutely flabbergasted that this kind of beauty could actually exist in a place like Arlington. But for purposes of thinking about tomorrow and the Seventh Ecumenical Council, imagine if all in your churches, imagine if you walked in tomorrow morning and every single icon in your church had been taken down. If the iconostasis had been stripped bare, if the walls had been covered over or everything ripped off the walls, it's sort of shocking to imagine that. And when I went to visit Mount Athos the first time, we were in Thessaloniki. And in the outskirts of Thessaloniki was a church, a Greek church, obviously, where the abbess from the monastery that's near us, St. John the Baptist Monastery in Goldendale, the abbess's name is Euronissa Efpraxia. So we went into this church and we saw that all the walls were white, but they had scaffolding up there and they were actually painstakingly peeling off this whitewash and revealed all these icons that were underneath. So you say, well, what happened there? What happened was that the Turks came in, right? When the Ottoman Empire came in, and they're against images. And so they whitewashed over all these icons. So the thing I'm telling you actually happened in that parish. One day it was full of iconography, the walls and the ceilings, and the next day it was painted over. They allowed them to worship, but they did not allow them to have icons in their worship. Okay, so now, why in the world do we have icons? I mean, what's the point of us venerating an icon? And I always like to hope that people have had a good catechism when they brought into the church, But my experience is that oftentimes people have a rather poor catechism, or they've had perhaps no catechism. And so they do things because they come into the church and they see people doing certain things, they imitate them, but they don't really have an understanding of why they're actually doing that. And that's unfortunate, okay? And I'm not here to judge any priest and what his system is of bringing people in, but it is important that we know what we're doing and why we're doing what we're doing. So we know for sure that an icon is never to be worshiped. When we bring people in baptism in our church, we have these 10 or 12 little points that people have to affirm. This is what we believe. And one of them is that we venerate icons, but we never worship an icon. So for us, right, worship is reserved for the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And that's clear. I don't think anybody has any issues with that. But I would say that one of the most controversial things for many converts, many inquirers, we'll take a step back. When inquirers come to our church, one of the most confusing things is to see people venerating icons, right? Making the sign of the cross, maybe offering up a little prayer, then actually kissing that icon. And it takes people a while to warm up to that. And I have even discovered that even after people start doing that, there still can be a little bit of discomfort or confusion. It just seems odd to them because they've never done anything like that before. But why do we have icons, right? I mean, people like to decorate themselves. People dress nicely, correct? They fix their hair up a certain way. People fix their houses up and their yards up, and they decorate the walls of their house. But it's strange that we find ourselves in an iconoclastic, right? In other words, by that I mean people that don't like images. The same people that want to dress nicely and have nice houses and yards are the same people, Protestants now I'm talking about, and actually it's even drifted over into Roman Catholicism, who are opposed to imagery in the church. That's a very interesting world in which we find ourselves. I would even argue that if you look at architectural conceptions now, buildings, the way they're built, they're not built with beauty anymore, right? It's just functionality and they're kind of plain. So what I'm saying by all that is that we live in an iconoclastic world, at least and especially in terms of churches and worship. So here's this big challenge. But for us, there's not really any challenge we haven't faced before. So if some new issue arrives and confronts the Orthodox Church, we discover, well, after all, it's not really a very new issue because the church has dealt with this at some point in her history. So we know that in 787, the Seventh Ecumenical Council, the church had to deal with this controversy. There had been, for about a century, there had been this huge controversy about whether or not there should be images used in worship. And the decision that they reached, right, because tomorrow we're honoring the fathers of the Seventh Ecumenical Council, the decision that they reached is absolutely dogmatic for us. In other words, we're not debating that. We're not going to have a conference and decide that we're going to agree with these points of the Seventh Ecumenical Council, but we're going to disagree with these points. Absolutely not. That's just not how we operate as Orthodox Christians. The conclusions reached by the fathers in an ecumenical council are dogmatic for us. Okay, so then you say to yourself, what conclusions did they reach? I mean, what are the functions of icons? And one of the obvious functions, and you know what, this is not minimal. This may seem kind of superficial perhaps, but one of the functions of an icon is that they make churches beautiful. Right? And there's nothing wrong with beauty. I mean, God is a creator of beauty. If I could show you, if I could take my little camera and show you my backyard, I'm surrounded by evergreen trees. I've got plants on my deck. There's just part of us that likes beauty. And we should like beauty in our churches. And I'm saying, I realize many of you converts have come from churches where maybe there was a cross on the wall. Maybe there was nothing. Maybe it was just a praise band and drums and guitars and synthesizers, but nothing of beauty in terms of worship. So I want to read you a little quote, and this is a hymn about the restoration of the icons in the Orthodox Church. Here's what it says. The Church of Christ is now embellished like a bride. Just my granddaughter just got married a few weeks ago, and I'm not very objective, but she was a beautiful bride, right? There's something beautiful about a bride. So now the fathers are talking about this in the context of a church. The Church of Christ is now embellished like a bride, having been adorned with icons of holy form, and it calls us all together spiritually. So on Thursday, we celebrated the feast of St. Simeon, the new theologian, and he became the abbot of the monastery of St. Mamas. And what do we discover when he becomes the abbot? That he adorned the Holy Church with iconography, much more than was already present there. Why? Because he said it creates a sense of holiness in a house of prayer. So it's very important now that we should not only have icons in a church, but we should have icons in our home for beautification. Secondly, St. John of Damascus says, since not everyone is literate, right? In those days, not everybody could read. They didn't have access to the scriptures like we do today. Since not everyone is literate, nor has leisure time for reading, the fathers agreed that such things as the incarnation, right? There was the nativity of Christ, his miracles, his crucifixion, his resurrection should be represented on icons. In other words, it's important that the churches have these depictions so that when people walk in, like people always say, you know, Father David, sometimes my mind wanders in church. As an Orthodox priest, I say to them, I understand that. My mind wanders too. But we're going to give you something upon which your mind may wander, right? So when our ceilings are covered with iconography, most of our side walls are now covered with iconography. So if people begin to wander and think about St. Nectarios or think about the transfiguration of Christ or the raising of Lazarus because they're looking at that icon, I mean, is that the end of the world? But if there's nothing there, and if all of a sudden your mind starts wandering off to, I don't know what, your food preparation or some kind of sporting event, no, that's not a good thing. So the church gives you something upon which your mind may wander. Then St. Photius the Great says, just as speech is transmitted by hearing, he says, so an icon imprints an image upon the tablets of the soul, right? So there's something really important about being able to read and understand what an icon is, and that triggers certain things in our mind. Thirdly, icons are reminders, and that's why every home needs one, right? Because obviously we can get caught up in all these day-to-day concerns and these activities. And when we pass by an icon corner in our home, or in my case, I've got icons all over the place. So when you pass by an icon of a Theotokos or of Christ or of a patron saint, you can stop, right? You can just say, wait a minute now. I'm caught up in all these activities, and you're changing diapers, or you're taking kids to appointments, or you're cleaning your house, and it's sort of a Mary Martha thing. It's not that what Martha was doing was wrong. It's just that Mary had chosen the better thing, right? And so icons can kind of help us to stop a little bit and rethink that. Then St. John of Damascus uses the word concise. He says, icons are a concise means of remembering Christ and the saints. So that's why, you know, we don't put them in our bathrooms, obviously, but you should have icons all over your house. I try to encourage that with our people. Fourth function of icons is to stir up a desire to imitate their lives. Okay, and by that I mean we look at them and we want to acquire the virtues that these saints have acquired. So, you know, we're coming up to November 9th. That's the feast of St. Nectarios. St. Nectarios has become a beloved saint because there's been so much written about him, because he's contemporary, because that movie, I'm sure all of you have seen it. And if you haven't, I just please make it a priority to watch The Man of God, that movie about St. Nectarios. But if you've watched that movie or if you've read his life, you realize the incredible humility that he possessed, and humility in the midst of this shocking brokenness that he was put through in his life with these false accusations. But the point is humility. And so if you pass an icon of St. Nectarios, and that icon reminds you about his life, and reminds you about humility, then all of a sudden you can think of your own life and just say to yourself, I mean, is this a virtue that I need to be striving to acquire in my life? One of the decrees of the Seventh Ecumenical Council is this: the more continually holy persons are seen in icons, in other words, the more often you see them, the more we who behold them are lifted up to the memory of the prototypes and to an aspiration after them. In other words, we want to be like them. What, you know, when you have kids, sometimes they put up posters in their room, and maybe I don't know what kids are into, but maybe it's a skateboarder, maybe it's a dancer, it's somebody they want to be like. And in one sense, icons are like that for us. We have these depictions of these people because we want to be like them. We aspire to be like them. Father Thaddeus, our thoughts determine our lives. He said, we become what we habitually contemplate. Aha. So that's why a church needs icons. That's why you need icons in your home, because at least it creates an opportunity for you to look on that icon and begin to habitually contemplate not only the person depicted, right, but in particular, the life of that person depicted. And then you say, well, Father David, I don't really know the life of that person that's depicted, or I don't really understand the transfiguration, or that's when you can do some reading, right? I mean, that creates a certain kind of hunger. You can say to yourself, all right, I'm going to figure out who is Saint Mamas, who is Saint Simeon, the new theologian. Like, why are these people important, or should they be important in my life? Here's another quote from St. Gregory of Nyssa. This is a great quote. Somebody sent this to me this week. I've never seen this quote before in my life. So I want you to think about your life in the context of being an icon, right? Because, you know, St. Paul writes to the church in Colossae, and he says, Christ is the icon. Christ is the icon of God. But now here's a quote from St. Gregory. Every one of us is a painter of his or her own life. Our soul is like the canvas, and the virtues are the paint. Jesus Christ is the image that we should copy. Now, that is such a beautiful thing, because tomorrow, I don't know what, you know, your priests are going to emphasize. And then there's also, like, I've been emphasizing all sorts of things about iconography. But the point is that the ultimate icon is you. So your church could be filled with iconography, and yet your life could be completely messed up. So that's not a good thing, right? You can appreciate the beauty of icons, but the most important icon to work on is you. So Mary and Martha, right? Martha was busy with all sorts of activities. They weren't bad things, but Mary chose something better, right? And that something better was to sit at the feet of Jesus and learn. So we say to ourselves, okay, if my life, if your lives, right, are canvases, and you're trying to paint, the thing you're trying to paint, the thing you're trying to restore, actually, just like I was telling you about that church that got whitewashed in Greece, and they were painstakingly removing all this white that blocked the images. That's our lives. Our lives have been whitewashed with sin, right? With desires, with things that have sort of kind of muted or maybe even hidden the likeness of Christ in our life. So the whole goal of the Orthodox life is to be healed. And what we mean by healing is the restoration of this likeness, so that suddenly Jesus Christ appears more and more and more clearly in your life. So your life is a canvas, right? Our job is to restore that. And what we're trying to restore is the virtues. We're trying to acquire virtues. Okay, so Metropolitan Arotheos Vlachos, he wrote a very beautiful thing. He said, one of the beautiful things about learning to kiss icons, I want you to listen to this very carefully, because this is really a great quote. One of the beautiful things about learning to kiss icons and making prostrations is that the world opens up for us as we come to realize, not simply in theory, right, but in reality, that Christianity is not simply about what we believe with our cerebral minds, but about what we do. And he says, and through the doing, we are gradually brought to a place of the heart where the true transformation can occur. Okay, so that's the premise now, that a true transformation can occur. So I'm going to talk very quickly, I won't belabor this, about the 7 deadly sins. And I want to take a look at the extreme it can go to, and then what it should be. And so what we're talking about now is you're a canvas. We're trying to paint. We're trying to cause the likeness of Christ to reemerge in our life. And we're saying that reemergence is the acquisition of virtues. Okay, so the first deadly sin is pride. Now, the extreme of pride is self-loathing, right? We're trying to move against pride. And so it can sort of err in the direction of self-loathing. No, that's not what we're trying to accomplish. What we're trying to accomplish is the acquisition of humility. We don't hate ourselves, but we're humbling ourselves. Okay, the transformation of greed. The transformation of greed is not wastefulness, right? We're not just blowing our money. We used to be greedy and hoarding, and now we're, no. Transformation is generosity, right? We're not hoarding this. We're not wasting it, but we're being very thoughtful, and we're being generous in the distribution of our money. The transformation of lust is not prudishness, right? It's chastity. So you see this middle road here. The fathers always talk about the middle way. And so when we talk about transformation and transfiguration, we're trying to say, what's the middle way here that the fathers lay out for us? The transformation of anger, right, is not flattery, right? We're not going to go over and try and brown nose somebody. What we're trying to do is find patience, right? The middle way is patience in our life. The transformation of gluttony, right, is not a complete deficit. It's not anorexia. See, it's not going to that ridiculousness of cutting everything out, but it's self-control, right? The fruit of the Spirit is self-control in our life. The transformation of envy, right, is not cowardliness. It's not being afraid, but it's actually brotherly love. And then finally, sloth is not to become a workaholic. I'm a lazy bum, so I'm gonna reverse that, and now I'm gonna always be working overtime and never see my wife and kid. No, the balance is to become diligent in what we do. So I'm going to try and put that in a sentence. So here's what we're not to do. The goal of our life is not to be a prideful, greedy, lustful, angry, gluttonous, envious sloth. Okay? That is a marred or a disfigured image in us. Rather, we are to become a generous, humble, generous, chaste, patient, self-controlled, loving, diligent person. That's the image of Christ restored in us, right? So we honor the saints to their icons because they show us the way to attain this image.